Speaking of the Tasman District Council, it wants drug testing of our water to see who takes what drugs where. Tasman District Council has previously asked for random drug testing of car drivers generally. So it suggested a water testing policy to the local government New Zealand conference in Christchurch, calling for standardised tests to be implemented nationally. And that remit was passed with an 85% majority, and councils will now lobby central government for support. Can you see great benefit accruing from knowing that someone has crashed a car while, for example, on meth in Whangarei or ecstasy in Christchurch or cannabis in Balclutha? Does it really... Can you see the great benefit here?
Wait a minute, what are they saying? Are they saying test the water so that you see what people are excreting, and then as a general suburb you say that that entire suburb is using meth or something?
Well, you can... I don't know if you'd generalise. I don't know to what extent you'd need to generalise. You'd have specific indications of what drugs were being used.
by suburb?
Yeah,
by class.
I actually talked about this last time I was on the panel. See, I was ahead of the game.
Wait a minute, what side are you on?
No side.
Right.
But in terms of there was been some piloting done around it that you can actually test the wastewater, and you can actually tell real time what drugs people are using. So in the areas that it has been tested, they could tell, for example, that how much methamphetamine is in the water during the whole week, but in the weekend it spikes because there's more cocaine in the water because it's like a recreational drug. You can actually do that, and it's a much better way of figuring out what's happening in your community with drugs.
Okay, the way you've put it sounds fascinating. Must be done.
All right, can I move on slightly? In Toronto, population 3 million, the city's medical officer of health, Toronto's top public health official, Dr. Eileen de Villa, says the time has come to decriminalise all drugs. She's pushing the city's Board of Health to push the federal government for action. She says the drug problem's getting worse and worse. The only way to deal with it is medically, not by criminalising people. So what's your view? Do we go back to the days a century ago where you just took what you wanted and it was buyer beware, and we'd look after you if you got ill from it, and we'd try and get you off them? But
and a lot of things contained heroin.
And some cocaine.
What was in Coca-Cola?
Yeah.
I guess that was cocaine, right?
Cocaine, yeah.
Purportedly, yeah.
People gave their children opium to get them to sleep.
Just a little bit of heroin to get to sleep.
Yeah.
The argument is that it couldn't be much worse than the situation with drugs that we have. No, it's a terrible thought, Reuben. The situation
it's got this faraway look in his eye as well.
It couldn't be worse than what we've got now. So you'd make all mind-altering substances maybe illegal for minors. You'd keep it as a crime to drive under the influence, and otherwise you'd have open slather. What do you both think?
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, I think that would mean people would know what they're taking, because you would have there'd be like food standard labelling.
Okay, so you'd have all the ingredients.
A lot of people are
not
being...
necessarily. There would still be a black market, presumably, and people would take any old thing.
If you get rid of the black market, then if people know what they're taking and there's information around it, I think that's a lot better than people not knowing what they're taking and then, carking it.
Like the sort of going to Amsterdam and you get Moroccan or you get whatever in the coffee shops, you actually know because it's legal, and that's a fair point, actually, I think. I also think if it's not on the black market, it'll take the business out of it, so it's not...
Yeah, you're just making gangsters rich.
Yeah, exactly, that's right, and they're really pushing the drug, like in methamphetamine in New Zealand at the moment, so...
Okay, so you've both got a certain amount of sympathy with that point of view. Cass Carter, lovely to have you on the panel.
Thank you, Jim. Nice to be here.
Reuben Can, always a delight.
A pleasure likewise.
Thanks for your company, everybody. We're back tomorrow, and here is Checkpoint.
Toti mai hoa mai he kōrero, kei te haere he kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Thank you for joining us on Checkpoint. Tonight, US President Donald Trump returns to America amidst a storm of criticism after his summit with Vladimir Putin and his backing off of claims Russia did not meddle in the 2016 US election. Anihira Black says she passed on to police the names of 4 people she believes may have been involved in or have knowledge of a pedophile ring she's alleging involved her former husband. 9 children have been orphaned after their parents drowned in a tragic fishing accident on an Auckland beach yesterday. An expat Kiwi tells us about the moment a 17-year-old New Zealand boy was released from a detention centre, and Kendrick Lamar about to play in Dunedin.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat in Aho. Donald Trump has flown back to Washington and into a firestorm of criticism from all sides over his comments after a summit meeting with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. The American president told media he saw no reason to doubt Russian assertions. The Kremlin did not interfere in the 2016 US presidential election. The BBC's Jane O'Brien reports.
Reaction to President Trump's apparent willingness to believe Vladimir Putin above his own intelligence agencies was swift and fierce. But the most astonishing came from the US Director of National Intelligence himself, Dan Coats, whose judgment about Russian interference was publicly questioned at the summit. He felt moved to issue a statement reiterating the assessment that Russia did meddle in the 2016 election and was continuing its ongoing and pervasive efforts to undermine American democracy.
Jane O'Brien. The former Republican governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, has also joined the chorus of criticism about Mr. Trump's post-summit performance.
He stood there like a little wet noodle, like a little fanboy. I mean, I was asking myself, when are you going to ask him for an autograph or for a selfie or something like that?
Arnold Schwarzenegger. Some pro-Trump commentators have defended the president, saying the criticism is part of a campaign by high-profile politicians who'd never liked him. The widow of a Bay of Plenty Māori leader says she's given the police the names of 4 people she believes may have been involved in or have knowledge of what she's calling a pedophile sex ring of which he was part. Te Awanui Arangi Black died in 2016, aged 48, and Anihera Black last week released a video in which she accused him of pedophilia. Some former friends have strongly rejected the accusations against him. But Ms. Black is standing by them, saying she knows of 3 victims who were children when they were abused.
They've talked about the symptoms of the abuse and how that has affected them, and also about the abuse itself. Not in detail, just really that it happened.
And you can hear a full interview with Anihera Black on Checkpoint shortly. The Australian government is seeking legal advice about the release of a 17-year-old New Zealand boy from a Victorian adult detention centre instead of being deported. The boy, who's lived in Australia since the age of 10, had been controversially held at the centre since March, reportedly for non-violent offending. He's won an appeal to get his visa back and is believed to be returning to family in Sydney. A spokesperson for Australia's Home Affairs Minister, Peter Dutton, says the decision has been handed down and the Minister is taking legal advice as to options. The Nurses' Union and District Health Boards have just ended a day of talks in Wellington. Negotiators for both sides spent almost 6 hours in closed-door negotiations, our health correspondent Karen Brown reports.
Today's meeting was an attempt to find common ground in a deep dispute over pay and staffing. Afterwards, a DHB spokesperson said the talks had either adjourned or ended for the day, and a joint statement will be released mid or late tomorrow morning. There was no immediate comment from the union, nor was there any comment about whether a revised offer for nurses is on the table. What appears likely is that the two sides are exploring a possible way forward and need more time to consult their respective teams. Ko Karen Brown tēnei.
A Ministry of Social Development manager fears racial bias has thwarted his Indian parents' application to emigrate to this country. Immigration New Zealand believes his mother, Sala Kurana, has breast cancer in the past, but her family says she has not. Jill Bonnet reports.
Jatin Kurana says their family is heartbroken by the rejection of his parents' residence visa and the fear that anti-immigration sentiment is behind it. He says officers are focusing on negative factors to make excuses to decline people rather than considering the positive contributions immigrants can make. He says because of the health findings, his parents can't now get a visitor visa to see their 1-year-old grandson. Immigration New Zealand says it followed specific rules and criteria after Mrs. Kurana's medical and chest X-ray certificate were examined by 2 medical assessors. This is Jill Bonnet.
Firefighters have been battling a big blaze at a factory in South Auckland. 13 fire engines are currently at the scene in Bairds Road, Otara. Fire and Emergency says the building was unoccupied and the fire is now under control. It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport, the Hurricanes are optimistic about Wes Goosen, but more cautious about Brad Shields for Friday night Super Rugby quarterfinals against the Chiefs. Outside back, Goosen left the field after a no-arms tackle to the head from Chiefs centre Johnny Fa'auli last weekend, while Shields exited earlier in the game with a rib injury. Hurricanes assistant coach John Plumtree says it's a day-by-day situation with Captain Shields, but feels Goosen is tracking well.
Wes is trucking along pretty well. We're hoping that by Thursday, Friday, he would have gone through his protocols and that he'll be able to take a place in the starting 23.
John Plumtree. The A-League is poised to receive a huge injection of star power with Revelation's 8-time Olympic gold medalist Usain Bolt may be set to play soccer in Australia. Bolt's quest to play professional football has stepped up in recent months, the 31-year-old sprint champion trialling with clubs in Europe. A-League club, the Central Coast Mariners, says they're talking to Bolt about a 6-week trial, and his football agent says the deal has been agreed in principle. And Argentina's football icon Diego Maradona has taken over as chairman of the Belarus club Dinamo Brest. Maradona, who made headlines for his antics at matches during the World Cup, has signed a 3-year contract with the club and was introduced to fans by riding around the city of Brest in a monster truck. That's the news.
US President accepts Russian denials.
President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
Shocking a former intelligence agent.
The notion that the president would discredit his intelligence community is ridiculous, it is outrageous, it is deeply disappointing, it's disturbing.
And our foreign minister reacts.
What do I make of the recent circumstances? Well, I'm bemused. We're all confused, we're all bewildered.
Enlightening news. Philippa Tolley and Guy and Espen. A morning report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, Dunedin's Wildlife Hospital says its long-term funding must be addressed as it celebrates being operational for 6 months. And after 10, the British satirist Craig Brown, best known for his parodies in Private Eye, takes on Princess Margaret in his latest book, Ma'am Darling. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel and the Central High Country. Fine spells and a few showers. Showers more frequent about Auckland and Western Northland from tonight. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine but isolated showers about Western Bay of Plenty and a few elsewhere from tomorrow afternoon. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and mainland Southland. Fine but some cloudy periods about Otago and Southland tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, fine spells and isolated showers. Fiordland and Stewart Island, occasional rain or showers. And the Chatham Islands, rain with possible heavy falls, easing to showers overnight, then gradually clearing tomorrow. It's coming up to 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for being with us. We appreciate the privilege of your company. We begin tonight in Helsinki, not words often said during recent years on Checkpoint, but it's the words that were said there that were remarkable. Donald Trump is a polarising figure, of course, but it's difficult to find anyone outside his most staunch supporters standing by his performance as he stood by Vladimir Putin. And his critics, well, disgraceful, an absolute low point, nothing short of treasonous. Those are just some of the reactions to the summit between the President of the United States and the President of Russia. Although it was the joint media conference afterwards that really threw the Russian blue amongst the pigeons. Mr. Trump was repeatedly asked to censure Russia for its involvement in the 2016 US presidential election campaign, and he repeatedly declined. His decision to not do so has left many seeing red. CNN's Jim Acosta has this report on the Helsinki summit and the fallout.
Vladimir Putin could not have scripted the moment better himself, as President Trump tossed aside the U.S. government's conclusion that Moscow interfered in the 2016 election and cozied up to the Russian leader. In a stunning moment, Mr. Trump blamed America, too.
Yes, I do. I hold both countries responsible. I think that the United States has been foolish. I think we've all been foolish. We should have had this dialogue a long time ago, a long time, frankly, before I got to office. And I think we're all to blame.
The moment played right into Putin's hands, who continued his denials.
Could you name a single fact that would definitively prove the collusion? This is utter nonsense.
As for the Justice Department indictment announced late last week, accusing 12 Russian agents of hacking into Democratic Party emails, Putin said he would invite investigators with special counsel Robert Mueller's team over to Russia to question officials.
I don't know the full extent of the situation, but the President Trump mentioned this issue, and I will look into it.
The Russian president did admit one thing. He wanted Mr. Trump to win in 2016.
Yes, I did, because he talked about bringing the U.S.-Russia relationship back to normal.
As Putin offered up a memento from the World Cup, it was clear who was in control of this field.
Melania, here you go.
There would be no public confrontation to stop meddling in U.S. elections.
Would you denounce what happened in 2016, and would you warn him to never do it again?
So let me just say that we have two thoughts. You have groups that are wondering why the FBI never took the server. Why haven't they taken the server? Why was the FBI told to leave the office of the Democratic National Committee?
The president was all but admitting he'll take Putin's word over the assessment of his own intelligence officials.
I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
Putin weighed in on perhaps the biggest lingering question.
Does the Russian government have any compromising material on President Trump or his family?
At first, Putin smirked at the question as laughter broke out in the room. Then he dodged again.
Yeah, I did heard these rumors that we allegedly collected compromising material on Mr. Trump when he was visiting Moscow. Well, distinguished colleague, let me tell you this. When President Trump visited Moscow back then, I didn't even know that he was in Moscow. I treat President Trump with utmost respect. But back then, when he was a private individual, a businessman, nobody informed me that he was in Moscow.
Both leaders quickly left the room with so many unanswered questions in their wake. Back in Washington, leaders from both parties were shell-shocked. Senator John McCain released a statement saying today's press conference in Helsinki was one of the most disgraceful performances by an American president in memory. Former President Obama's CIA director John Brennan tweeted, Donald Trump's press conference performance in Helsinki rises to and exceeds the threshold of high crimes and misdemeanors. It was nothing short of treasonous. GOP Senator Bob Corker captured much of the bipartisan disappointment.
I did not think this was a good moment for our country.
For President Trump, this was yet another foreign trip where he disrespected key U.S. allies while warming up to undemocratic leaders like Putin. As one senior Republican congressional aide put it to me, it was shocking to see the president side with Putin. But as one source close to the White House who's familiar with the president's thinking put it to me earlier today, the people around the president are simply too afraid to disagree with him. It seemed like the president was all alone in his views today, and they didn't seem like America first, more like Russia first.
That was CNN's Jim Acosta. Michelle Kosinski is in Helsinki for CNN, and she'll join us later in the programme. It's 13 minutes past 5. The family of a man charged with murdering his mother and two siblings in Perth knew of his mental health issues, as did some authorities. Tian Kim Vernon Peterson Crofts was taken into custody after his mother Michelle and her 8-year-old son Rua were found dead inside their Ellenbrook home on Sunday. His sister, 15-year-old Bella, was found in the backyard critically injured but died on the way to hospital. Our reporter, Te Aniwa Huri Hanganui, spoke to the man's cousin, Joseph Hullen, who was very close to the family.
Following the horrific scene at the weekend, Tian Kim Peterson Crofts appeared in the Midland Magistrates Court, mumbling confusingly over the magistrate and ignoring requests to stop. Australian media is reporting the 19-year-old had gone to the St John of God Midland Public Hospital in a psychotic state the night before the killings, but was turned away when the police became involved. But despite his erratic behaviour, staff at the hospital reportedly did not consider his condition to be a medical problem. His cousin, Joseph Hullen, says he struggled to cope with mental health for years.
Various members of the whānau have tried to assist him to get help both in New Zealand and in Australia. And unfortunately, it looks like he's been allowed to or has fallen through the gaps.
Joseph Hullen says Tian Kim was a good kid and the family are shocked at what has happened.
You don't expect these things to happen. You know, our children have mental health issues that would lead them to a point like this where, you know, they make bad choices and don't see that there's any other way to deal with the demons that they have in their head.
Tien Kim's father has lived in Australia for the last 30 years and raised Tien Kim and his other siblings there. Following his arrest, the teen has been remanded to a secure mental health facility pending another court appearance next week. Mr Hullen says his heart goes out to Michelle's family.
Shelley's family have lost a daughter, a sister, grandchildren, so we feel the utmost sympathy and aroha for that family.
A GoFundMe page asking for donations towards funeral costs for the 3 victims has raised more than $18,000 in 2 days. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko te aniwa, hurihanga nui aho.
And later in the programme we'll be back in Australia to discuss the 17-year-old New Zealander released from a detention centre there. It's 5:15. Anihira Black says she has passed on to police the names of 4 people she believes may have been involved in or have knowledge of what she's calling a pedophile sex ring involving her former husband. Te Awanui Arangi Black died in 2016, aged 48. He was highly regarded in both the Bay of Plenty community and in the Māori community nationwide. And some former friends and associates have strongly rejected the accusations against him. Those accusations were made in a Facebook video 2 weekends ago. Anihira Black strongly stands by them, saying the 3 victims she knows of were children when the abuse occurred, one of them as young as 7, and that those asking for them to prove it need to understand they have the right to be safe from re-victimisation. But Awanui Black is not here to defend himself, and his friends say that makes it profoundly unfair to publicly level such accusations against him. I asked Anihira Black when she first became aware of them.
It's sort of not something that just dawns on you. A lot of it is discovered over time, or your intuition picks up on things, but you don't really want to listen to your intuition sometimes. So I can't pinpoint a particular time, but in terms of disclosures to me about the pedophilia, that's something that can be easily recorded as to when that happened.
How many people have disclosed their first-hand experience of being the victims of Awanui?
3 at the moment. There are other people who've come forward through other mutual friends or other people who speak for them.
And can you tell me about the disclosures of those 3? How did they take place?
Over a long process, really. It's not something that just happens. It's a process of being able to feel safe and being able to feel that you're going to be believed. Some of it's through their behaviour, and then finally not being able to contain the secret and talking about what happened in their lives.
Talking about what happened? So did they talk directly to you about what happened?
Yes, they've talked about the symptoms of the abuse and how that has affected them, and also about the abuse itself. Not in detail, just really that it happened.
And the 3 people who've disclosed have all told you personally that it happened?
They have talked to me about that. It's something that's taken a while to work through and come to that point.
And what point are you at now? Forgive me, but in terms of the direct accusations against Awanui, and Miriam Kamua asked you a similar question on Muriwai, and you said they're not accusations, they're fact. So in terms of your belief in the fact of these accusations, what are they? What do you think Awanui did?
He sexually abused children and destroyed their futures, as was his future destroyed by his abuser.
Was Awanui himself the victim of abuse? Was that something he experienced during his childhood?
It was, and he actually never disclosed it to me himself, even though when I worked it out, he wouldn't admit to it. It wasn't until the day we buried him that his childhood friends had disclosed that to me, that he had confided in them. His father was also convicted for paedophilia and spent time in prison. So it's a cycle of destruction and something that we all need to take note of and work towards eliminating.
Is that what you are hoping for as a result of your disclosure, of their disclosures, that we can collectively work to acknowledge and confront and deal with?
Definitely. It's providing a space for all survivors, because I don't like the word victim. It just further victimises them. So they're really survivors. The victims are the ones who have taken their own lives because of what happened to them. They're the victims. But it's really about giving them a space to be able to speak their truth and be free and heal. And that's my wish for all survivors of sexual abuse.
You said in your first Facebook posting that raised all of this. You said, we give you permission to speak your truth.
Mm. A lot of the... Oh, sorry, Karen.
No, you speak.
You know, a lot of the time people just need to hear that. They need to hear that they do have permission from somebody, or they can give themselves permission to do the basic of things. You know, even give yourself permission to cry. Give yourself permission to have a good time if you go out. You know, we've just been so conditioned by other people and society that we feel powerless, and that's how I feel survivors of sexual abuse, that's their reality. So if we can allow them a space to move into in the most supported way we can, then that allows them to speak their truth.
Did you ever discuss any of this with Awanui when he was still alive?
Yes, when he first told me that he was viewing preteen porn, I told him that was not who I was, and I was disgusted by that, and he knew that I wouldn't let that sit with me.
Sorry, forgive me, Auntie Hera, I missed that. What porn did he tell you about?
He had disclosed to me that he had been viewing preteen porn, so young girls. And, of course, that was not in my realm of... I just couldn't believe it. It was at a point in our marriage where he had also made many disclosures about infidelity. So he was trying to be as honest as he could in terms of trying to win me back. But, the person I thought he wasn't who he really was.
And I guess there's an aside there, isn't there? Because lots of people are telling us who they think Awanui was. So we have Willie Te Aho on Muriwai saying, you know, that he was a fantastic man and that he absolutely does not believe the accusations you are making. We have Parenga Mihi Gardner, who is saying the same thing. She just says, full stop, it is not true. And I guess what they're taking is his reputation, and they're placing his reputation before your accusations. You don't say they're accusations, you say they're fact. But what would you say back to them?
They only see one side of the man. They're talking about what he did, not who he was. They don't know what goes on behind closed doors, and I'm sure they have their own stories about what goes on behind their closed doors. So I feel aroha for them, because I know that, you know, we all would like to believe that Awa was the man he projected himself to be. But his behaviour showed that he had a whole lot of other things going on as well as that. So I'm not taking away from the fact that he did great things. I'm just saying, yes, he did great things, but he caused great pain at the same time.
Because I guess the point that Willie Te Aho is making most explicitly is he isn't here now to reply. He isn't here now to defend himself. Had these accusations have been made against him whilst he was alive, there could have been a rigorous police investigation. He could have been spoken to by the police. This could have been tested in court. He could have either admitted it all and sought help and been dealt with accordingly, or denied it all and received some form of defence. In his absence, none of those things are happening.
Well, disclosures were made after he died, so I don't know how you can, what you can do with that. It is what it is.
Ngāi Te Rangi have put up reward money. Have they had any response to that?
I'm not sure what their response has been, but I don't know that their reward money is an incentive for survivors to come forward. It may, in fact, be a disincentive.
As an aside, that you've talked about a sex ring or sex rings. Do you know the other adults who were involved in those?
I know of a few.
And you know names?
I've given a couple of names to the police already.
You have given names to the police?
Mm-hmm.
And do you believe that the police are proceeding with some form of investigation?
I'm not sure. I don't know what their process is. But I've just given names as names of interest, and if other people were to do the same thing, then I'm sure that builds a stronger case for investigation.
So I just want to clarify this. You have passed names on. You absolutely have given the police names.
Yes.
How many?
Of people of interest, 3. Or actually 4.
4 names. And do you feel like you're being taken seriously by the police?
Yes, I do. I think that they see that I'm genuine in my intent. It's not malicious, it's not vindictive. It is really just to get the truth out there and speak my truth and provide some support for those who are survivors of these people.
Graham Cameron writes a thing in the spin-off saying, we have to believe people. We have to now start confronting the secrets in our communities. We have to now start looking after our children. What sort of response are you getting from people? How are people responding to you?
Look, in general, there's just been an overwhelming outpouring of love and gratitude. Like I said, people are giving me their accounts of their own personal stories. They're talking about opening up to their own family members about things that have happened in their past. They're talking about speaking with their children and their children disclosing things to them. It is pretty incredible the amount of freedom people have found through my post in terms of being able to say their own truth. In terms of negative comments, well, you're always going to have that, and those are people who just really are projecting their own fears and insecurities and are not yet ready to understand.
There's such a big narrative here, isn't there? There is such a big narrative about the vulnerability, the helplessness of the victims of child sexual abuse. I mean, they are the weakest, least articulate people there are. And there is a sense from the responses you are describing that some people feel freed to speak and feel free to say, that was me. But that could also be a separate narrative from the one about Awanui, because people are saying, where is the proof? And so the two things are conflated, but in the particular case of Awanui, you absolutely believe and have no doubt that the accusations you are making against him are true.
Absolutely. Irrefutably believe in those that have disclosed to me about them, about Awanui.
Anihira Black talking to us earlier this afternoon. It's almost 5:30. Let's change the subject entirely now. He's won Grammy Awards, he's won a Pulitzer Prize, he was listed as one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people of 2016. His single Humble was the second most streamed song on the planet in 2017. Tonight he's beginning a 3-date New Zealand tour in Dunedin. Our Otago Southern reporter Timothy Brown is at Forsyth Bar Stadium. Timothy, behind you, people are starting to go in. I think the gates are opening as we speak.
They are, John, they are. There's a real buzz down here as they start to let this very young and very excited crowd in. Some have been queuing here since 7 a.m.
Wow.
So it's a cold evening. I hope everyone's rugged up because it's going to be a long night for those who started at the first thing at the crack of dawn.
And of course, the real Kendrick fans are going to want to be as close to the stage as possible, right? So there's general seating up the front, and that's what those youngsters they're trying to get up to the stage, aren't they?
Yes, there is VIP tickets that have allowed some to get in earlier and get closer, but everyone else has rolled the dice, got down here as early as possible. There is people at every single gate on the stadium hoping to get right up to that stage and get hopefully within touching distance of a hip-hop superstar and a real hero to these kids.
Yeah, he truly is a superstar, isn't he? And a Pulitzer Prize winner, quite an extraordinary songwriter. Ed Sheeran has set all sorts of records in Dunedin, commercial records, the busiest retail weekend in Dunedin history. How does this compare? How does Kendrick compare?
Well, I think that's the key there, John. Ed Sheeran was a weekend, and it was a massive weekend. 70,000 people descending on the city from all parts, Australia and everywhere else. This is a Tuesday night. It's not comparable, but it's special in its own right. This is a big deal for Dunedin. This is our little dot at the south end of the map being put on the main stage with a huge superstar, with a huge pull around the world.
Yeah, it's going to be a wonderful night. You're not going, are you, Timothy? I dared ask on an RNZ salary if you could afford a $180 ticket, but are you going?
Unfortunately not. Life has got in the way. The plan was originally to go, but things change, and I guess damn is all you can say.
OK, well, thank you for being out the front to describe it as people are going. Gates just opening at 5:32. Concerts in Auckland. That first concert sold out. The tickets were just snapped up in minutes. It was just utterly bizarre. I think 12,000 tickets gone in about 10 minutes. You're with Checkpoint. It is 28 minutes to 6. Coming up on the programme, a heartbreaking story. 9 children have been orphaned after their parents drowned in a tragic fishing accident on an Auckland beach yesterday. We have the latest from our reporter. An expat Kiwi talks to us about the moment a 17-year-old New Zealand boy was released from a Melbourne detention centre yesterday. Remember, this was the detention centre for adults. And more than 20 people have been injured in Hawaii after their boat was hit by a lava bomb. Nona next with business, but before it all, Katrina with the headlines.
The American President Donald Trump has arrived back in Washington amid a hail of criticism from all sides over his comments after a summit meeting with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. The American president told media he saw no reason to doubt Russian assertions the Kremlin did not interfere in the 2016 presidential election. The president's been under fire from both Republican and Democrat politicians, as well as intelligence officials who are insisting that Russia interfered in the election. The police believe criminal gangs are behind a recent spate of homicides in Waikato. 3 homicide investigations are underway, the latest relating to the death of a Ngaruawahia man whose body was found at McLaren Falls, south of Tauranga on Friday. The killings of men in Huntly in late June and Hamilton 9 days ago are also under investigation. The widow of a Bay of Plenty Māori leader says she's given police the names of 4 people she believes knows about what she is calling a pedophile sex ring, of which he was part. Te Awanui Arangi Black died 2 years ago, and Anihera Black last week released a video in which she accused him of pedophilia. Some former friends have strongly rejected the accusations against him, but Ms. Black says she knows of 3 victims who were children when they were abused. A bird strike has grounded a flight to Sydney from Auckland Airport. Flight NZ105 has been delayed after the inbound flight due to operate the service encountered the strike. The flight was supposed to depart at 4:05 and is now scheduled to depart at 6:15 on a different aircraft. The Nurses' Union and the District Health Boards have ended a day of talks in Wellington late this afternoon. Negotiators for both sides spent almost 6 hours in closed-door negotiations. Today's meeting was an attempt to find common ground in the dispute over pay and staffing, and a DHB spokesperson says a joint statement will be released tomorrow morning. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina, which is about 25 minutes away. Nona on the other side of me. Business news now with Nona Peltier. Sometimes I just say Nona on the other side of me and we start talking. And if you've just arrived, if you've recently moved to New Zealand, you would think your surname was Nona on the other side of me.
That's quite a handle.
It is. Nona Peltier, consumer inflation has picked up in the last few months. What is behind the rise?
It's actually, a lot of that is expenses that we have closer to home rather than imported goods and so on. So it's things like housing prices, housing costs, say rental accommodation, that's been on the upside. Insurance costs, electricity costs, construction costs.
All the stuff that strangles you when you're on low incomes. All the sort of
stuff, even maintenance costs and those kinds of things. So construction prices in Auckland and Wellington rose between 0.6% and 0.7%. That's, maybe not so bad, but actually over in other centres rose quite a lot more, according to this survey, 1.2%, which is twice as high as before.
Over what period?
Twice as high as at your major centres, rather.
Right. And is this a quarter? Is this a...
Yeah. So this is a quarterly thing. This is the CPI, and this is what we use.
So 1.2% over a quarter is a hefty old...
it really is. Now, these could have been annual. Let me see, twice as high. I didn't actually write this story, so I'm not exactly sure if these are annual rises, but I think that's still reasonably high. 1.2%, I would assume that these are annual increases here.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because inflation, at some level, is a sign of a robust economy that people feel confident to spend money in. On the other hand, if you are a low-income earner and you have been one of those people who simply hasn't had a pay rise for years, you take no comfort whatsoever in the fact that the rest of the economy is moving off without you.
Exactly. And these are, some of these costs are unavoidable. Like you take electricity prices, 1.7% this quarter, 2.9% over the year. That's a 3% rise pretty much over the year earlier.
Which would be a hell of a lot more than many people have had in their pay packets.
And, that could be, you could say, well, that could be because of weather and so on, but that's from the quarter ending June.
Right.
So that's before the winter. So I think that you'll see that that's quite a hefty rise. And of course, then we've had petrol rises too. Those have been offset somewhat though by cheaper used cars. And also things like cheaper home home entertainment costs and so on, because we've seen some changes there with more competition. But overall, Auckland consumers will experience higher prices in the next quarter because of regional fuel tax increases as well. So but overall, the upshot of all of this is that the consumer price index rose 0.4% in the 3 months to June. That was a little bit lower than expectations. That's 1.5% for the annual increase. That means that the Reserve Bank is unlikely to raise interest rates probably until late into 2019. And even when they do, the rate increases are likely to be very gradual.
Yeah.
So I guess if you are a borrower, okay, so you're not going to be facing higher interest rates. But if you're a renter, prices are going up.
Yeah. This is an important story, I think. Seafood companies are being told to take responsibility for the treatment of foreign crews catching fish for them. Here, most emphatically. This is good. Who's saying that they need to take responsibility? Who's driving this?
This is the Labour electorate. So the folks that inspect these kinds of things, MB basically has come down hard on seafood industry, companies, right? So how it works is basically seafood companies don't have all of their own fleet catching the fish that they sell on to consumers. They use foreign flag vessels and staff that are foreigners. However, for them to fish in our waters, they must be registered to a certain New Zealand company.
That's right, in order to get access.
But that makes them responsible. Now, what happened was about 3 years ago, there was discussions with the industry saying, hey, listen, you need to pay attention not just to the sustainability of the fish catch. In other words, you can't catch more and we're going to supervise that, but also the people who are doing this catching for you. Some of them were grossly underpaid, and the foreign vessels were fined quite a lot of cash. Now, the seafood companies here in New Zealand escaped some of those fines because they couldn't, the regulators couldn't prove that the seafood companies knew that these workers were being underpaid. However, this has now changed. They're saying you have a responsibility, seafood company, for monitoring the well-being of the staff on these vessels, which you have registered, and you are going to be liable if we find that they are not being paid properly or being mistreated in some way. And it's up to you to regulate this, to ensure that you are meeting the requirements of New Zealand law. It doesn't matter if you're a New Zealand resident or a New Zealand citizen. If you're working for a New Zealand company, you're covered by the same laws as everybody else.
Good.
There you go. So that's going to change, and watch this space. Seafood companies are going to have to comply. There you go.
Thanks, Nada. What happened on the markets today?
Well, our top 50 index fell just 1 point to 8,979, which is much better than we were seeing across the Tasman and in other parts of the Asian market where there have been falls, mostly because there's a lot of worry about, well, for example, oil prices, which have fallen quite markedly over the last little while. We're talking about falls of about more than 4%. This is just this week. Concerns over supply and so on. That's unsettled the market, not to mention all the other stuff that's going on. But our dollar is down a little bit better, and who knows why that is. I think it's mostly because I guess the market's looking around New Zealand thinking, yay, not too bad. 68.3 US cents, 91.8 Australian and 51.5 British pence.
Nona Peltier, our business reporter here in Auckland. Thank you very much indeed. I believe we're going to Rebecca v. Prereq now. Is that where we're going? Thank you. We turn now to the 17-year-old expat New Zealand boy who'd been held for 4 months in an Australian detention centre. RNZ broke the news of his release last night. Acting Prime Minister Winston Peters confirmed it this morning. But the case remains controversial. It was an adult detention centre and the boy is 17. His release was ordered by the Australian Immigration Appeals Tribunal, and Peter Dutton, Australia's Minister for Immigration and Border Protection, has frequently overruled the tribunal. Rebecca Holt, herself an expat Kiwi, now working as a journalist in Australia, has frequently been to the detention centre in Melbourne and became involved in the boy's case once she learnt he was there. Wasn't known for a while that there was a 17-year-old in this facility. When she discovered he was being released, she went to meet him, but even then, whether or not he would actually be released, given the power of Mr Dutton, remained in doubt.
Yes, and I knew that there would be some issues around what could happen yesterday. The young man we're talking about, he wanted me to go and get him immediately when he was told he was released. He was going to be put on a plane back to his family in New South Wales yesterday afternoon. So I knew that there'd be an escort for him to go back, and I wasn't sure whether he'd be allowed to be released to me. His guardian was okay for that to happen, but we couldn't get the paperwork to make that happen, and it was getting very close to the time of the flight. Once I got there and he was released and we met in the reception area, it was very close to when the plane was going to leave. So we made the decision. I said to him, look, it's all right. You get in the van and I'll follow. I'll drive behind so you don't feel like you're on your own.
Can we talk about this place, Rebecca? And I don't want to imperil your access because you are there all the time and you need to be able to get in. So feel free to not answer this question. But is this detention centre an appropriate place for a 17-year-old boy to be?
This is in no way an appropriate place for a young person to be. Unfortunately, what happens to asylum seekers in Australia who are kept in detention centres, that they are treated, probably the most understandable comparison is that they're treated like people who are in a prison in New Zealand. So they're treated like they're in a high security prison in New Zealand. That would be a good comparison for people.
And so it's potentially a brutalising environment. What sort of state is he in now that he's out? Has he survived it relatively unscathed, or is it not easy to say that?
I think it's too soon for us to see what the impact of this has had. He had some really low points in the last month. We spent a lot of time on the phone. Sometimes he would call me very late at night. And, you know, when you're a parent and you have your own teenagers and you know that someone's very vulnerable, and you do pick up those calls. So we had some conversations, and I have said publicly I was really, really worried about his mental health, and he did say to me several times, more than several times, that he was struggling. So the relief yesterday that he was released is just huge.
I guess the question now is where to next? And once again, we don't want to imperil his situation in any way, and we want to be cognizant of the particular character of Peter Dutton, who gets to make all sorts of decisions on a fairly personal and subjective basis. But is there an expectation that he will be able to stay in Australia?
I'm aware that Minister Dutton's made some comments earlier today. I won't comment on those, but unfortunately, New Zealand teenagers in Australia don't have the same access to systems of justice or social welfare, those kind of systems that Australian teenagers living in New Zealand have. So, you know, a lot of your listeners will be aware of that there's an indiscrepancy there. Going forward for this young man, we just have to wait and see what happens. And it's very nerve-wracking.
That's Rebecca Holt, who has been covering the story and has met the boy and been to the detention centre. It's 40 minutes to 6. 9 children have been orphaned after their parents drowned in a tragic fishing accident on an Auckland beach yesterday afternoon. Keita Yuke and Mutupa, both originally from Burma, were fishing off the rocks at Muriwai beach when they were swept into the ocean by rough waves just before 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon. Datu Kay, the couple's eldest child, says they went fishing nearly every day, and if her dad wasn't fishing, he would walk on the beach to be near the ocean. Today, Datu Kay, her 8 siblings and family friends gathered in their Auckland home. Katie Scotcher reports.
I met Datu UK on the driveway of her family's home. She was off to buy food for her 8 siblings and friends. At 25, she's the oldest of Kedar UK and Mutupa's 9 children. She was shy at first, but quickly welcomed me into her home. Inside, her 8 siblings, family, friends and members of the community had come to support the children. Rows of their shoes lined up outside the orange brick house. When asked about her parents, she said they loved the outdoors.
They always go out. They don't want to stay home. They said when they stay home, she's not feeling no good. She said when she go outside, she got more air to breathe.
Muriwai was the couple's favourite fishing spot. They went fishing almost every day and would bring home their catch to fry or bake. Sometimes her siblings would try to give cooking a go.
Because my sister also cooked, but when I compare my sister and my mother is the best.
Da and her family are from Burma. She was 6 when her family fled the country and travelled to a refugee camp in Thailand, where they lived for 10 years before moving to New Zealand. They left their grandparents and extended family behind. Her parents did not work. Their English wasn't very good, but Da says they were taking English lessons. She tells me she was sleeping when her parents left to go fishing yesterday. She said she called her father early yesterday afternoon to ask him to bring the car home so she could go to work. He said he would be home soon. At 2 p.m, emergency services were called to Muriwai Beach.
2:30, nothing. I call again, but they don't answer the phone. But still waiting. I tried to call many times. Up to 3 o'clock. I call my younger brother because when I call my father, it's all the way on the voicemail.
Muriwai is just a short 20-minute drive from the family's house. Today, the waves, relentless and unforgiving, were crashing against the shore like any other day. The sky clear of clouds. On the beach today, I spoke to Mark Goodhue, who was involved in yesterday's rescue. 24 hours earlier, he pulled Da's father, Kedu UK, from the water. This morning, he gathered with the 9 children, family, friends and others involved in the rescue at the beach for a vigil. He said the vigils, like the one held this morning, help the Coast Guards with closure.
It's great to have the local iwi support us in that way. We sort of see us as guardians of their territory, and for them to work in together with us and it realistically help us lift the burden as well, which is a great thing.
Tim Jargo was also involved in the rescue. Again, I spoke to him as we watched the crisp bluish-grey waves crash on the rocky Muriwai coastline. He described today's view as like a postcard. Yesterday was a different story.
She was very cloudy, there was a bitter cold wind blowing in, and the storm was about, the seas I should say, were about three times what you're seeing now, so they were really difficult conditions.
Datu UK says her parents' funeral is expected to be held later this week. I tamaki makora mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Katie Scotcher tēnei.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. It's coming up to 10 minutes to 6. Investigators are looking into whether a Hawaiian tour boat got too close to the area where molten lava from Kilauea volcano is pouring into the sea. More than 20 people were injured when their boat was hit by what's called a lava bomb. Elizabeth Brown reports.
At the southeastern tip of Hawaii's Big Island, glowing molten lava cascades into the ocean, meeting the cold water in a geyser of steam and gas. It's nature at work and something tourists are keen to see.
We got lightning in there and all.
Lava Ocean Tours charges tourists $225 for its lava cruises, promising a life-changing experience. But for those on its dawn cruise, nature got a little too close when a basketball-sized piece of molten lava, known as a lava bomb, exploded out of the sea. It hit the boat, puncturing the roof and landing on passengers below. Ikaika Kalama was on another vessel, which went to the tour boat's aid.
We've seen parts of the lava on the vessel when we pulled up to it. There's a few big chunks that was on the roof, and we could see chunks laying all over the side of the boat and on the floor of the boat.
The boat limped back to the town of Hilo. Matthias Cush from the Hawaii County Fire Department says several people were taken to hospital.
We coordinated a response with our ambulances and fire units to meet them here at the dock. We had 9 patients overall. 3 were transported by medic units, and 1 went to the hospital via personal vehicle.
Matthias Cush says one woman suffered a broken leg while others received burns. A number of people were treated for more minor injuries on the dock. An investigation is now underway involving state and local police, along with Hawaii's Department of Land and Conservation. Its deputy, Jason Radula, says under Coast Guard rules and permits, tour boats are supposed to stay 300 metres away from the lava entry point.
It's premature at this point to discuss what violations might be found out of this. The investigation is going to determine several things, including whether or not there are any violations of federal or state law. There are permit conditions. Whether or not any of those conditions were violated is part of the investigation, so it's too early to comment on that.
Jason Rodula says it's possible the safety zone around the Kaholo lava flow may be extended. The Kilauea volcano has been erupting in spectacular fashion for more than 10 weeks, opening up lava-filled fissures on its slopes. It's already destroyed 2 whole housing developments, and the eruption is showing no signs of slowing. For Checkpoint, I'm Elizabeth Brown.
We're heading north shortly, but just before we move on, just got a request in from police that they'd like us to pass on. Police are seeking information from the public as they continue to investigate the homicide of Mitchell Patterson, whose body was found in the water below McLaren Falls Bridge at Tauranga. That's Friday, 13th July, last Friday, of course. Police would like to hear from anyone who saw vehicles in the vicinity of McLaren Falls, Lower Kaimai McLaren Falls Road, between the hours of 5 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. on Friday the 13th of July, 5 to 7:30 a.m. They are particularly interested in any light-coloured 4x4 and any other vehicles that appear to be travelling in convoy or singular in and around the McLaren Falls area. Anyone who saw anything in that area between 5 and 7:30 is urged to contact the police. This is in the Mitchell Patterson homicide case. That just in from police in the Bay of Plenty. Let's head from the Bay of Plenty to the north. Where do you go on a cold winter's day if you're homeless in Whangarei? Up till now, it's been anywhere really, out of the wind and rain, where they won't kick you out. There's no city mission in Northland's largest city. But very soon the homeless will have a place to go, at least in daylight hours. Here's our Northland reporter, Lois Williams.
In the old army barracks in downtown Whangarei, they've gathered to bless the place and banish any kehua, or ghosts, from its shabby halls. Tireless and unsung heroes like Kaumatua, Carrie and Ihaya Kake have been taking in the homeless for 40 years. Better known salt-of-the-earth sloggers like Carol Peters, who runs the 155 Community House, the soul food people who feed the hungry and homeless twice a week. They put out the call for a day shelter last month, and now they've got one. The government, which still owns the old barracks, has given them consent to use the back end of the building with its kitchen, bathrooms and living space. Carol Peters says it'll take a heap of work to make it usable, but people are already pitching in.
We've had people who are tradespeople volunteering, we've had people like Dulux offering all the paint, and there may be other businesses that want to donate something. So really, you can see that's an enormous job. It's not going to be covered by the money we've got. So really we need those volunteers and we need those donations.
Dr. Peters says the homeless centre will be a place where people can get a meal, have a shower, wash their clothes and see a doctor or social worker and be helped to find a real home. The funding, $40,000 so far, has come from the Ministry of Social Development and Te Puni Kōkiri. Carrie Kake, who's living on borrowed time with a dodgy heart, says for her it's a lifelong dream come true. She wants the place to be called Open Arms, and she says it'll be a place of aroha.
You know, love can do a lot of things, and that's what people need to understand, that we're here to give love out as well. And that's been my dream, to be able to share the love that we have as a whānau for others that may not feel that they're loved.
And the Reverend Mary Nicholas from St John's in Campbell says Whangarei churches want to help too.
In my heart, this is the gospel with grunt. I'm here as a representative of the churches together in Northland to put out the call to invite people with compassion to come and be part of the resources that a place like this needs, because you need people.
As for the dozens of Whangarei's homeless, it's the best news they've had this winter. Gwyn has been holed up in an outside corner of the building with his bed and few belongings. It can get a bit damp, he says, and it'll be great to be able to go inside for a cuppa.
Oh, the other night, you know, when it was that torrential rain? Yeah. Oh, it was... See all that?
Yeah, the guttering.
Yeah, no, and it's just, but it just runs straight through. Straight through my room.
Ensuite bathroom.
It's all right.
It's not all right.
Whangarei's Open Arms Day Centre is set to open in a few weeks' time, depending on how fast the work gets done. And Carrie Kake's already plotting her next project, a night shelter, so no one has to face the dark without a roof over their head. In Whangarei for Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
Thank you, Lois. An Oregon woman has been found alive 7 days after she accidentally drove off a California cliff during a road trip. Angela Hernandez suffered a brain hemorrhage and fractured both collarbones, several ribs and a collapsed lung after she swerved to avoid a rabbit on the road. Goodness gracious, people in Central Otago will be wondering why she did that, and plunged off the cliff in Big Sur. Nathan Frandino has more.
We just found word that my sister was found and that she was found over a cliff.
Angela Hernandez went missing on July 6th during a road trip from Oregon to California. She was traveling to visit her family and had sent a text message to her sister Isabel before starting her drive that day.
A simple text, I'm about to start driving, and then I replied okay with the heart back to her, and that was the last that I had any contact with my sister.
Then on July 13th, hikers saw a wrecked Jeep Patriot SUV at the bottom of a 200-foot cliff in the Big Sur area. Monterey County sheriffs confirmed it was Hernandez. She was found conscious, breathing, and with a shoulder injury.
I just want to thank everybody. I'm sorry, I'm like in shock. Everybody that helped. It's day 7, and you guys all helped us through the whole thing, and Angela would not be okay. I'm so happy. I'm so happy. Just thank you to everybody. Thank you to Monterey County. You guys did everything.
Officials say Angela survived by drinking water from the radiator of her vehicle. She's recovering in an area hospital in fair and stable condition.
That report from Reuters. Just before we go to the news, Philip Paxton, who is a wonderful regular listener. Hi, Philip. We're delighted to have your company always to Checkpointers. Contact us via Twitter, Donald Trump's favourite medium, Philip, and says, can we have some beach safety PR? And it's a good point, isn't it? Those West Coast Auckland beaches, those of us who know how dangerous they can be, kind of take it for granted that everyone else will know how dangerous they are. Potentially, latently, or basically the whole time. But do we do enough to tell people who possibly haven't grown up, for example, with an understanding of the rip and pull and the variability of the tides, the vagaries of the tides, the unpredictability of the tides on those beaches? Do we do enough to explain it to people? There are signs there, English language signs? I don't know. Anyway, we'd love your feedback on that. Thanks, Philip, for raising it. It's a good point. Let's discuss it. 2101 is the text number. Coming up, the news.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The top US intelligence official is standing by his claim that Russia interfered in the 2016 presidential election. Following a summit meeting with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki, Donald Trump told media he saw no reason to doubt Mr. Putin's assertions the Kremlin did not interfere in the election. He said the Russian president's denials were very strong. America's National Intelligence Director Dan Coates says his agency is clear that Russia not only meddled in the election but has made ongoing pervasive efforts to undermine America's democracy. For his part, Mr. Putin says it's utterly ridiculous that some people think his country meddled in the election. In an interview with Fox News after the summit meeting, he reiterated that Russia has never interfered in US affairs.
Russia, as a state, has never interfered with the internal affairs of the United States, let alone its elections. I'm not interested in this issue in this single bit. It's the internal political games of the United States.
The translated words of Vladimir Putin. The widow of a Bay of Plenty Māori leader says she has given the police the names of 4 people she believes may have been involved in or have knowledge of what she's calling a pedophile sex ring of which he was part. 10 days ago, Anihera Black released a video in which she accused Te Awanui-a-Rangi Black, who died in 2016, of pedophilia. Some former friends have strongly rejected the accusations against him, but Ms. Black is standing by them and says the police have taken her seriously.
I think that they see that I'm genuine in my intent. It's not malicious, it's not vindictive. It is really just to get the truth out there and speak my truth and provide some support for those who are survivors of these people.
Anihera Black says she knows of 3 survivors who were children when they were abused. The police believe criminal gangs are behind a recent spate of homicides in Waikato. 3 homicide investigations have been launched in recent weeks, the latest relating to the death of a Ngarua Wahia man whose body was found at McLaren Falls, south of Tauranga, on Friday. 3 arrests have been made in that case. The killings of 2 men in Huntly in late June and Hamilton 9 days ago are also thought to be linked to gang activity. A whangarei woman who's been taking in homeless people for 4 decades says the city urgently needs a night shelter for women. Carrie Kake was at today's launch of Whangarei's new day centre for the homeless in an old army barracks. She says it's a good start, but homeless women in particular need somewhere safe to stay at night because they're being hurt.
I'm getting phone calls about women getting hurt in our town here. There's been 2 rapes in our city over the last 3 months. I got a phone call last week and it's quite heartbreaking.
Kari Kake, the Whangarei Centre has been funded by the Ministry of Social Development and Te Puni Kōkiri and will be staffed by volunteers. The ANZ Bank has denied it makes more money by keeping people in conservative KiwiSaver funds. A group of financial advisors has called for KiwiSaver reform, saying the big 5 Australian-owned banks have a conflict of interest because they earn more if people remain in the less aggressive default schemes they run. ANZ's General Manager of Wealth Products, Anna Marie Lockyer, says that's not true.
Actually, the fees are
lower for conservative type funds than they would be for more growth orientated funds, given the investment management practices and research that's required with those more growth biased assets. So I don't think there's any conflict in that regard.
Anna Maria Lockyer says ANZ is doing everything it can to get people into the right savings scheme for them, but not enough for deciding to make the jump to more aggressive saving. 2 forestry companies have been fined for unlawfully discharging sediment into a Christchurch stream. Forest Management and Sharples Logging were fined $41,000 in the Christchurch District Court today. They were helping clear trees after the Bort Hills fire last year and had already been warned about the impact of sediment on the Hoonhay stream. Another complaint resulted in legal action. A spokesperson for the Canterbury Regional Council, Gillian Jenkins, says significant areas of the Port Hills lost vegetative cover during the fires, exposing the soil to erosion. She says the council won't hesitate to take action against individuals and companies that fail to meet their obligations. It's 5 minutes past 6. Sport, the New Zealand women's sevens team are in ideal shape going into this weekend's World Cup in San Francisco. They won Commonwealth Games gold in April and the final 3 events in this year's World Series. The defending World Cup champions face Mexico in their opening match on Saturday morning, and assistant coach Corey Sweeney says there's a real buzz in the camp.
We're exactly where we need to be at this point in time. The girls are showing some really good intensity since we've been here. The accuracy is good. Girls are playing the way we want them to play. And I'll tell you what, there's just excitement. There's some real excitement with the girls, and that's exactly what we want.
Corey Sweeney. The Warriors have stuck almost entirely with the team that performed so well against the Broncos, making just one change to their starting lineup for this weekend's National Rugby League clash with the Melbourne Storm. Wing Ken Maumalu returns from injury to take his place on the left wing for Sunday's match in Auckland, and Peter Hiku drops to the bench. The 20-point thumping of Brisbane puts the Auckland-based side 7th on the ladder, but equal on points with the 4th-placed Roosters. And controversial Wallaby star Israel Folau is not ruling out fresh speculation about an off-season switch from the New South Wales Waratahs to the Queensland Reds. Ahead of Saturday's Super Rugby quarter-final against the Highlanders in Sydney, he says he has a lot of options, which he'll look at once the season comes to an end. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, we have a window on the world of the Italian Mafia's Slovakian connection. Nick Bollinger samples a Talking Heads-inspired album from Angelique Kidgo, and Sean Hendy discusses the physics of keeping warm.
And after 10 new angles on the stories of the day, from global politics to football, and sometimes both. Was there any coverage in Russia of the Pussy Riot pitch invasion?
Yes, of course. I mean, you know, it was a lot of sort of memes and jokes going on Twitter about how Putin's going to be seriously angry about this ruining his final. But overall, the way that the World Cup went surprised people here in Russia, surprised even FIFA officials and the Russian government.
Lately with me, Brian Crump, filling in for Karen Hay, as part of Nights on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel and the Central High Country. Fine spells and a few showers. Showers more frequent about Auckland and western Northland from tonight. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine but isolated showers about Western Bay of Plenty, and a few elsewhere from tomorrow afternoon. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and mainland Southland. Fine, but some cloudy periods about Otago and Southland tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, fine spells and isolated showers. Fiordland and Stewart Island, occasional rain or showers. And the Chatham Islands, rain with possible heavy falls, easing to showers overnight, then gradually clearing tomorrow. It's 8 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Great top. Paisley.
Oh.
Paisley, that's what it's called, isn't it? Paisley.
Yeah,
I miss Paisley. Well, there it is. It's back.
I'm glad I'm bringing it to you, John.
Thank you very much. I used to have a Paisley waistcoat when I was at university.
Oh, of course you did.
Dick. Yeah, that's probably a fair call. Yeah. Anyway.
Moving on.
Thanks, Katrina. Donald Trump is being accused of not putting America first, but instead putting Russia first. The US president is facing heavy criticism after he aligned himself with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, during their Helsinki summit. He failed to confront the Russian leader over Moscow's meddling in the 2016 US election and said he saw no reason to believe US intelligence agencies over Mr. Putin's assurance that Russia was not involved. The former FBI director Mr. Trump's sack, James Comey, has just tweeted, "This was the day an American president stood on foreign soil next to a murderous, lying thug and refused to back his own country." Say what you really mean. The BBC's David Willis has more on the reaction to Mr. Trump's Helsinki performance.
Arriving home to a blizzard of condemnation, the president, who pledged to put America first, is facing accusations of weakness from members of his own party. President Trump's refusal to condemn Russia's attempts to sway the outcome of the 2016 election and his characterization of Vladimir Putin as both strong and powerful have incensed many here. Among them, the former CIA director John Brennan, who branded the move nothing short of treasonous on Twitter and accused President Trump of being in President Putin's pocket. Whilst the Republican Senator John McCain called it one of the most disgraceful performances by an American president in memory. President Trump's reluctance to criticize Russia has prompted speculation that the Kremlin may have something on him, incriminating information obtained during a business trip to Moscow, perhaps, a suggestion Mr. Trump was forced to confront before leaving Helsinki.
I guess he said as strongly as you can say it, they have no information on Trump. It was an interesting statement, too. You know, many years ago when I was there, what was it, 13, 14, a long time ago, he said there were many, many business people there. In all fairness, I was a very successful businessman, but I was one of a lot of people. And one thing you know, if they had it, it would have been out.
As to the denial of Russian meddling in the election which swept him to power, the president's very own head of national intelligence, Dan Coates, said in a statement, "We have been clear in our assessments of Russian meddling in the 2016 election and their ongoing pervasive efforts to undermine our democracy, and we will continue to provide unvarnished and objective intelligence in support of our national security." Invited by an American TV reporter to inspect a copy of the indictments involving 12 Russian military officers accused of hacking the computers of the Hillary Clinton campaign, the Russian president demurred, only to repeat his insistence that Russia wasn't involved.
First of all, Russia, as a state, has never interfered with the internal affairs of the United States, let alone its elections.
President Trump is to meet with members of Congress on Tuesday, and there are those ready to challenge him with failing to stand up against an old adversary on behalf of the country that he was elected to protect.
David Willis there from Washington. Michelle Kosinski is in Helsinki for CNN, watching and listening in disbelief as President Trump repeatedly and publicly took Vladimir Putin at his word.
It was just jaw-dropping. It was above and beyond, I think, anyone's wildest dreams of the kinds of things that he would say, and above and beyond Vladimir Putin's wildest dreams. I mean, you know, the Kremlin always gives the same line when it comes to, especially their interference in the U.S. election. They always just say, you know, show us the evidence, there's no evidence, fake news, basically. And that's pretty much what Putin did. But it was President Trump who kept taking it farther and farther, to the point that he was trashing his own country, saying that we're both at fault, we've both done foolish things, trashing the U.S. intelligence community, basically saying the intelligence community in Russia is better, and that this wouldn't have happened with Hillary Clinton's server and her emails, and Russia wouldn't have let that happen. I mean, he just kept going on and on. Afterwards, people were, and I'm not talking about journalists who were listening, I'm talking about U.S. allies and senior foreign diplomats were using words like, this was sickening, and it was an abomination, or they were just speechless.
Which is fascinating, but there is also, I guess, an inevitability that in the circles that the commentariat, for want of a better word, that it would be received like this. And I saw your colleague, your workmate, Anderson Cooper, giving Donald Trump as hard a time as I have ever seen a CNN anchor give any American politician. But outside of those circles, the people who voted for Trump, in the Rust Belt, where the working class and somewhat marginalised white voters are, do they give a damn?
It remains to be seen, because there is a group of people that voted for Trump Many of them still say, you know, my vote for Trump was more a vote against Hillary Clinton than it was for Trump. He was the lesser of two evils, in my view, that sort of thing, that are disgusted by these kinds of statements, really disgusted, especially when it comes to siding with Russia over your own people. I think for many people that is going to be just a bridge too far. I think for some that work in this administration, that is going to be the bridge too far. However, you still have those people when you're even just on Twitter right after the fact, they're saying, well, yeah, there's lots of reasons to doubt the U.S. intelligence community. And, well, it's not as bad as what Obama and Hillary Clinton did, and they might not have a great handle on the facts necessarily, but they certainly have ideas and they certainly have opinions. They get them from partisan radio and television and commentators. So, it's hard to say how many of those hardcore Trump supporters are still going to feel like the man can literally do no wrong.
What about when he returns to Washington? And this is an extraordinary thing to even begin to imagine. The U.S. intelligence agencies are absolutely certain and singular and unequivocal. There was Russian meddling in the U.S. election. Full stop. Donald Trump stands up in Helsinki and says, I've asked Vladimir Putin, and he says there was none. It is such a deliberate decision to stand by Putin. What happens when Trump returns to Washington?
Oh, we're wondering the same thing. I mean, this is all still very fresh. He's back now. We hear people within his own administration, anonymously, of course, saying that, people around him are afraid to try to get him and afraid to try to strong-arm him not to do things like this. I think what we're initially going to see, and this is something that we're already hearing, members of Congress, including Republicans, saying we need to do more here. We need to pass a resolution supporting, first of all, the U.S. intelligence community and saying that we back them up 100%. We may need to take a tougher stance on Russia ourselves and try to enact more sanctions or tougher sanctions, make sure the sanctions that we can get to are going to be put in place to the fullest effect. So I think there's going to be some reaction. But again, that question is always with Republicans, especially those that are up for re-election, how much do they dare go against the President of the United States? Yes. Even after something like this was very disturbing. And this was, as we've been seeing from the reactions, very disturbing, to say the least, among some of those Republicans as well.
Michelle Kosinski, CNN correspondent, who's in Helsinki. Extraordinary times we live in. An interesting email from Richard saying, hi John, aren't the US intelligence agencies who assert that they have irrefutable evidence that Russia interfered with the last US presidential election the same agencies that took the US to war when they were equally certain that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction? Very good question, Richard. I do think, though, the inclination or the predisposition of George W. Bush and Tony Blair to go to war in Iraq was thoroughly material, but you're right, they were acting on some advice. It's absolutely fascinating. Who do we believe and why? The politics of convenience as much as anything else, right? But boy, oh boy, Trump is at odds with the Washington establishment now in a way that I can't recall a US president being since Nixon. Quite remarkable. Thank you for your feedback tonight. 18 minutes past 6. Well, it will be in 20 seconds' time, for those of you who want to complain to the BSA. A manager with the Ministry of Social Development says he fears racial bias has stopped his parents' application to emigrate from India in its tracks. And a woman whose Muslim husband was turned down for a visa 4 times believes Immigration New Zealand has been involved in ethnic profiling. RNZ revealed this month that Indians were the focus of a high harm model. That's a quote, by the way, developed by Immigration New Zealand's compliance section. Jill Bonnet reports.
Jatin Kurana says their family was heartbroken by the decision to reject his parents' residence visa, and he fears an anti-immigration push was behind it. Immigration New Zealand believes his mother, Sala Kurana, has had breast cancer in the past, while her family says she never has. Mr Khurana says because the department's visa decision makers are human, they could have been influenced by a mindset that sees certain nationalities as a particular threat.
There is an anti-immigration sentiment, especially if you're trying to come from India or China. But of course, no one's going to say that, up front. With government policy, I think there is a bit of pressure on immigration officers as well, not to accept many applications.
The father of two, who's an only child, says his father, Bhimsen Khurana, who's a retired bank manager, and his mother, who was a teacher, have twice visited them in Auckland. But because of the health findings in the residence decision, Immigration New Zealand will now not even grant them a grandparent's visitor visa, which means they haven't yet met their youngest grandchild, who's just turned 1. He says Immigration New Zealand seems to believe his mother had undergone surgery to remove a lump. She's now undergone 4 assessments because she was concerned she may indeed have cancer, but specialists found no evidence of it and think there's scar tissue from an old injury. Mr Khurana says that far from the compassionate changes people had been expecting from the new government, immigration has in fact been tightened up further in the last few months. Sophia Ali Malik is also convinced her Muslim husband's partnership application was treated as fraudulent because of ethnic targeting. She says Immigration New Zealand is racist.
We do believe that it has been profiled as ethnic profiling. I strongly believe that it's to do with Indians, because they say straight away, oh, people from India, oh, okay, that's what they are. They're fraud people. I'm very, very angry with immigration. It makes me feel very frustrated that they would do something like this in New Zealand, in this country.
She says she speaks with her Indian husband every day. She says their 3-year fight goes on and they've appealed his rejection to the Ombudsman. Immigration New Zealand says it doesn't believe the couple's marriage is genuine because they haven't lived together. Sophia says that's because she's had to return to her job in Auckland and her husband wasn't able to come to the country. And in relation to the Khurana family, immigration says it's following specific rules and criteria after Sala Khurana's medical and chest X-ray certificate were examined by 2 medical assessors. It says she was invited to comment on both medical assessors' findings during the process. For Checkpoint, Jill Bonnet.
21 minutes past 6. Indonesian authorities are investigating the slaughter of nearly 300 crocodiles. Villagers armed with knives, hammers and clubs killed the crocodiles in revenge for an attack that killed a man in West Papua. Nathan Frandino reports.
Villagers in eastern Indonesia took matters into their own hands over the weekend, slaughtering 292 crocodiles after a man was killed at a breeding farm. Officials in the Sorong district say the man entered the farm to pick grass for his livestock when he was attacked. That's when villagers decided to take revenge, says Imas Police Chief Emi Fenataruma.
These were spontaneous actions from residents around the area who entered the farm and killed the crocodiles. We tried to stop them, but all had already been done.
Officials say the farm had a license to breed the protected saltwater crocodiles, but one condition was that the reptiles did not disturb the community. Locals defended the actions, citing safety reasons.
It's better that this kind of animal is kept in places far away, so that it's safer for people and those who have livestock and farms.
The man's death and the subsequent revenge attacks are both under investigation.
That report from Reuters. The American investor and engineer Elon Musk has been hit by a barrage of criticism and may face legal action after he posted a number of bizarre tweets about the Thai cave rescue. He made a series of allegations towards one of the British divers, Vern Unsworth, including suggestions he was sus as he lives in Thailand. It came after Mr Unsworth described attempts by Mr Musk, who turned up at the flooded Tamlawang cave with a submarine, as a PR stunt. This report from the BBC.
The divers who helped rescue 12 Thai boys and their football coach from deep within a cave have almost universally been acclaimed as heroes, but not by everyone. Entrepreneur Elon Musk played down their achievement, saying they could have simply swum to the cave to get the boys without even using any diving gear. The tech billionaire appeared irritated that the rescue mission rejected an offer of a mini-submarine built by Mr Musk to assist in the effort. The row escalated when he then sent a tweet apparently making a baseless slur against Vern Unsworth, a British cave diver based in Thailand who'd ridiculed the submarine idea, calling it a PR stunt. Mr Unsworth condemned the tweet.
I don't really understand the guy. Obviously it's a bruised ego. You know, at the end of the day, we were here to rescue 12 young boys.
Unsworth had travelled into the caves in the first days after the boys went missing and helped bring in top international cave rescue experts for the mission. The British diver says he might now sue the billionaire.
Hopefully get a copy of the tweet later and, yeah, not finished. I'll take advice when I get back to London.
Legal advice?
Yeah.
The tweet sent out to Mr Musk's 22 million followers has now been deleted. But he still says he's planning to send his submarine to the now empty cave just to prove it could be done. Mr Unsworth has previously said the billionaire can stick his submarine where it hurts. For the boys continuing their recovery in hospital, their priority is returning home. They're expected to be discharged to their families on Thursday.
That report from the BBC. We spoke just before the news about the West Coast beaches. People want to fish off them and enjoy them. It's absolutely beautiful out there if you don't know that part of the world. But by golly, they're dangerous. Lots of suggestions and responses. People do think there needs to be greater education, greater signage, greater use of languages, etc. on those beaches. But a lovely suggestion from Rob. How about a cabinet full of donated life jackets? Plenty of them around. Cabinet next to sign, return after use. Rob, we think that's a fantastic idea. I don't know whether life jackets have an expiry date, but yeah, it makes some sense to us. Anyway, we really appreciate your feedback. Lots of people think greater education is required. It's 25 minutes past 6. It was one grand party in Paris. Grand is spelt with an E on the end. Is that grand? It was a big party in Paris as the World Cup winning football team brought their trophy home. France beat Croatia 4-2 in a pretty exciting 6-goal final to take the cup in Moscow yesterday. Revellers were already partying in the streets when the team arrived to a hero's welcome. The BBC's Lucy Williamson was on the famed Champs-Elysees.
This is the road that turns world champions into national heroes. France's victory parade along the Champs-Elysees today, a moment for the country's World Cup winners to bask in adulation. This team has reflected back to its nation an image it can be proud of. Young, triumphant, full of hope. Not just an emblem of national glory, but of all it means to be French.
I feel very, very proud to be French, and I feel incredible, and I'm so excited to be here with everybody else. It's a unique moment to share.
I'm proud of this team of France, and it's very important for us to see them.
The faces of France's young heroes were projected last night onto the War Memorial, a rare showcase of multicultural France. In Moscow last night, team coach Didier Deschamps, himself a player in France's World Cup win 2 decades ago, was honoured with a song and a bath of champagne. Back home, they did things differently. A metro station that once began Champs-Elysees temporarily changed to honour his name. And President Macron, who went to congratulate the players after the match, has invited them all to the presidential palace. Leaving Russia this morning, one of the team admitted it was all still sinking in.
When we reached the semi-finals, we started to think that maybe we'd take the cup home. The final turned out well. We could feel the excitement, and we made it.
Hard to process in Croatia too. The crowds here less jubilant, but still supportive. A country of 4 million, honouring their team, placed second in the world. The last time France enjoyed this moment, some of its new stars weren't even born. Now a new generation is out to celebrate a fraternity that represents all of France.
Lucy Williamson in Paris. Speaking of Lucy's in Paris, Lucy Hocking is who's a wonderful anchor with the BBC now. Expat New Zealander, studied at AUT journalism at the same time as my boss, executive producer of Checkpoint, Pip Keane, was doing a fantastic job out of Paris for the BBC yesterday. Go the Kiwis. Lots of feedback on Donald Trump. This from Andrea. Hi, John. Of course, Trump wants to believe Russia didn't interfere in the US election and claims to believe Putin when he denies interference. Proof that it did take place and validates his election to office. The surprise is that anyone is surprised. Yeah, that's probably a fair point, Andrea. A couple of people saying that we're anti-Trump. And that they think that there is a media conspiracy against Trump. I think the reportage of Trump is actually robust but fairly fair. But if you can find examples where the reportage is factually incorrect, please do get in touch. I mean, it's not the job of journalism to sanitise reality, and it's not the job of journalism to say that people are telling the truth when they're not. And it's not the job of journalism to spare people when they're in power. Equally, it's not the job of journalism to hold people to account simply because they are in power, although speaking truth to power is foremost in the role of journalists. But if you think we're tough on Trump, please cite examples and we will look into them. Thank you for your feedback, though. We appreciate it. Also coming in on the text tonight, accepting that Putin had a preference for seeing Trump elected, the question is whether this constitutes direct interference with the electoral process and whether the election hinged on the result of more overt interference directed by the Russian government. This is a recurring theme from Clinton, but is yet substantially undemonstrated, unproven. Yes, I guess that's the Mueller investigation and the key of it, isn't it? What is he going to find? Trump has spent a week travelling through Europe creating chaos and opening his mouth just long enough to change feet. Hope America wakes up and sees him for the moron he is, says Michael. Michael, not a fan. Some of you are Trump fans, so we appreciate you getting in touch with us. We appreciate you listening to Checkpoint too. On behalf of the excellent and hard-working Checkpoint team, that is the program for tonight. Have a wonderful evening. We hope to see you tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Washington intelligence officials insist Russia did interfere in the 2016 presidential election, despite President Donald Trump's acceptance of Russian denials. The widow of a Bay of Plenty Māori leader is insisting her late husband was part of a pedophile sex ring, and she's given police names of others said to be involved. A Whangarei woman who's been taking in homeless people for 4 decades says the city urgently needs a night shelter for women because they're being hurt. A Ministry of Social Development manager fears racial bias has thwarted his Indian parents' application to immigrate to this country. And the Associate Minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage wants to see details of Te Papa's proposed restructure in which 50 jobs could go. Our next news and weather is at 7.
The classic Talking Heads album, Remain in Light, reflected the group's interest in African music.